Good morning, everyone. So, sorry for starting a little bit late. It seems to be the IGF way. My name is Lea Kaspar. I've worked with the Global Partners Digital, internet policy organization based in the UK, and I'll be moderating this workshop, which is, by the way, called Working Together, about this workshop and what we're hoping to do here. The idea to organize this came about between Samantha Dickinson, who's sitting right here next to me, and myself, after having participated in a mapping exercise of trying to map internet policy, internet-related public policy issues and mechanisms where these are being addressed within the framework of the CSTD Working Group on Enhanced Cooperation. Now, apart from that, and that's kind of our personal interest where we thought this is a cool thing to do, this falls actually within a much broader context of growing demands for improvements to the overall internet governance ecosystem, and a renewed interest in a certain function that has been around in this space since practically the WSIS, which is to analyze and monitor ongoing policy developments in this field. This was, and maybe this is helpful to contextualize it within the IGF framework as well. The IGF was originally meant to perform this function, but for a number of reasons this has never happened. Institutionalized is something that's being discussed elsewhere, and we're not going to talk about that here. There's a workshop tomorrow that's at 2:30 to talk about institutionalizing what Bill Drake and I have called the clearinghouse function, and you're all welcome to participate there. What this workshop is meant to do is look at what's already out there and optimize outcomes. How we're going to structure it, I would like to go around the table and give time to people who have been working on similar initiatives to present what they've been doing. And I would also ask them to perhaps reflect on the potential value of collaboration and what they think, how that could happen. And I'd like to start with Samantha here. After we go around that first round, I'm just going to open it up for discussion and see what other people who think, and please feel free to let me know if you want to speak. So, Samantha, if you could say a few words about the mapping initiative that started within the CSTD Working Group on Enhanced Cooperation, and we'll take it from there.
Hi, I'm Sam Dickinson. I'm one of the co-organisers of this workshop, but I'm also now working for the IGF Secretariat. So I will speak once and then be quiet. Lea and I were observers to the Working Group on Enhanced Cooperation. So there was a need to try and make some sense out of that 700 pages. So the idea was to turn it into some sort of matrix, some spreadsheet that would collect similar information together to enable the working group to better analyse and then act on it. What was interesting in that process, so we were as observers were very privileged really to be able to participate so fully in a CSTD working group that we were not members of. What was interesting was the content actually only came from about 20 submissions. Yet we ended up with between 400 and 500 different issues from 20 submissions. We then had to group those in some way. We ended up with 24 categories. If we were starting from scratch, as us, we would not have used those 24 categories. But what we'd had to do was work with the material we had. So we ended up with 24 categories that, you know, if we were going to move this forward, we wouldn't use. We would do it a different way. But we had to work with what the working group had received. We got very enthused by the project, and we could see all sorts of things that you could do with it, new information you could add to it, ways that you could keep it updated constantly, that would enable you not just to do what the working group had planned, which was to see where are the gaps in cooperation between stakeholders and between governments, and then find ways to fix it, but you could enable everyone to be able to go, oh look, I'm interested in topic X, where in my region or in my country or in my stakeholder group can I go to discuss this? So it could be a really valuable tool. So we got really, really, really excited. And we wanted it to move forward beyond the working group. I'll move on. I think we should go straight to Mavi after I've spoken so you can talk about where it is now. But that's where we thought, how do you make sure this information doesn't die? That it's not just a project, a one-off that is static, but that can be built on. So that's where we wanted to start discussing with other initiatives that were similar to see how we can ensure that people can build on each other's work, communicate with each other, and find synergies.
Thanks. Mervy, would you be happy to perhaps say a few words about where the initiative is now within the CSTD? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity, and good morning to everybody. First of all, I'd like to express the Secretariat's gratitude to Samantha and Lea for doing an amazing job on voluntary basis in regards with the collection of inputs and putting them together and categorizing them into that spreadsheet of broad focus areas, and under them I believe that you had over 400 mechanisms and issues. Yeah, that's right. The ECOSOC decided in its resolution of today of this year that this work may be further continued by the CSTD Secretariat, and we examined in the Secretariat very carefully the mandate that we have on this mapping and gap analysis, as we call it informally. And the mandate that we have is to review the identified international public policy issues pertaining to the Internet, list where there are existing international mechanisms addressing these issues, identify the status of the mechanisms, if any, whether they are addressing the issues, and attempt to identify gaps in order to ascertain what type of recommendations may be required. So there are different parts in this mandate that we have carefully reviewed and thought through what is the best way to continue that work. Of course, there are also political sensitivities that need to be taken into account. Now, what we have decided to do in the Secretariat for the next intersessional panel of the Commission in late November, they will discuss this issue in the CSTD Commission in late November, last week of November in fact, is that we build on the work that was previously carried out through the correspondence group, and we would produce a more elaborated database which contains information on the public policy issues, on existing mechanisms, the status of those mechanisms, and possible gaps if we arrive there also. We have to find a very solid criteria through which to analyze the mechanisms. And also the scope. I mean, the scope is international, but does that include also regional? Does that include bilateral, for example? So at the moment we are working on building a solid criteria to form an objective review. So this is the work that has been done until now. So it's still at its initial phase, and the time frame that we have is relatively short. So that is why we are going to do it as a desk review and base it on the existing reality of Internet governance architecture, basically. There are three issues that I would like to maybe point out at this stage. The first one, that as the CSTD Secretariat continues to this work, it does not have to start from zero. I mean, we have the identified over 400 issues and mechanisms. We don't have to stay confined to those, but we recognize them and we take them as the basis of our work. Secondly, I would reiterate what the working group said in its final report. It is going to be a living process, and it will always be living. The Secretariat will take it to the next stage, and then it is up to the intersessional panel to decide how to take the work forward. But we have to recognize that new issues and new mechanisms arrive every year. And this cannot be something that would be completed at any given point of time. Lastly, the ultimate objective that we have in mind should be to create something useful for all stakeholders, so that the work wouldn't be forgotten after the intersessional panel or the next annual session, as a matter of fact. So all stakeholders at the moment struggle to understand what is the broad internet governance reality. What are the best and most effective ways and means to participate in it, and so on. So hopefully we can produce something that would serve later for the purpose of information finding. So one possibility is to convert the database into some kind of an online tool or platform. But of course that is also up to the CSTD members to see how they want to carry on this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting to hear what the CSTD is planning, and I'd like to kind of take up the point about perhaps taking it and creating an online database or an online platform, and ask my colleagues Deborah and Joanna perhaps to say a few words about how that could potentially be done. I know Deborah can also, if you're happy to say a few words about what APC is doing kind of in regards to the mapping, and then maybe lead on to say a few words between you and Joanna about the flyer that's just been handed out about mapping internet governance.
Sure, I'll start with a few words and hand over to Joanna once we figure out if we can actually project a work in progress on the screen in front of you. But essentially we had started to build a mapping of different internet governance processes in a static version just to help. So we come from civil society. I should introduce myself. I'm with the Association for Progressive Communications, and Leia and Joanna here are jointly worked on this project. And we started a mapping just to be able to better navigate different internet governance processes, and found that we constantly had to update it. And so we started to think about how we can make a dynamic map that could be constantly updated and linked to different information such as location, agenda, outcome documents, and then show the relationship between them. So the static map started to develop into something that you're starting to see on the screen. Is this the one, Joanna? Okay, I think this is the one that you can actually interact with, but the static one is coming up as well. And so we started to think about, in addition to the different events, which you see linked here, how we can filter them using tags and different themes to actually help guide someone through the process. So if you wanted to focus on cybersecurity, for example, we could then tag the different meetings and show, where you would want to look, what meetings are coming up, what the outcomes could be, how one can participate, what the preparatory process is, and link all that information in. So we've worked with actually a Turkish artist who I'm not sure if he's here or not, who's developed this into a dynamic map, and the data will be linked in it. It's a work in progress, as I said, and it will be launched, I think, on Friday at the Internet Ungovernance Forum. And I'll turn over to Joanna now, who can give more information.
I'm sorry, it's hard to visualize there, but as Deborah mentioned, the process here was to take that timeline with all the processes and try to make it interactive and as a database. So the idea, it's still a work in progress, but the idea is that you can go to one event, one process, like the IGF, and go to one of the meetings, and then have all the documents, in the case of, or an ITU meeting, then you have the agenda. Yeah, it's hard to see here, but the idea is to have the agenda, the discussion documents, the previous process that led to a particular meeting. So we are creating categories within processes, events, meetings, and issues to be discussed in each, and then trying to connect. What's the relation with one event or one process to another in this map? And the idea is that it's going to be collaborative, so people can come and present or give us documents of a particular process or relationships, suggest a relationship, so we curated and update the platform. This platform is still not uploaded to that address of the flyer because we are launching on Friday, but it will be online and for comments, and the comments can be related to labels and how to do tags or what kind of information we can integrate in the database to make the visualization more rich. But I think that's it.
Thanks, Joanna. So I've been working on this project with Deborah and Joanna, and there have been what we've learned and kind of thinking about how we can make information useful. How it actually started was that we were trying to build a strategy to engage in different processes, maybe just to give a bit of context and how that's like why we thought this was a valuable project and how it can help people engage in internet governance and not just be a static, knowledge bank. We had trouble with finding out what our priorities are in terms of like where do you need to engage, what are the processes that are relevant, and in doing that we started about thinking, okay, within internet governance, what are the processes that exist? We grouped them in several columns and looked at the UN strand, looked at the ITU strand, and looked at the WSIS plus 10 review strand to help us think about things and to help us build almost a taxonomy of issues. And I'd like to stick to that taxonomy challenge a little bit here. That was something that was also that's also relevant for what the CSTD is doing. And in the mapping that Samantha and I worked with, one of the issues that was contentious was how do you actually group internet policy related issues? So out of that list of 400 that we initially received, that's not really helpful. So if you have a massive list, that doesn't really help you think how to engage and map priorities. And so what happened in the working group was that out of that 400, it was narrowed down to 24, as Samantha said. Now that was between the working group members, and it wasn't particularly, in a sense, inclusive process. So having that conversation among many more people would be very much useful. I know Patrick here has worked a little bit about how taxonomizing issues in internet governance. Would you be happy to say a few words about that and kind of what you did? Sorry to put you on the spot. Well, not really sorry.
No, it's totally fair, Leah, and I apologize. Leah had actually invited me in April to join this workshop, and she just reminded me today that I never responded to her, and so I just responded about 30 minutes ago positively. So I suppose I've brought this on myself. The way that we have been thinking about this is in a very similar and I would say complementary way to the excellent work that's been done here with this mapping exercise. About a year ago, Vint Cerf, Max Sengus, and I got together and were very frustrated with the outcome of Wicket. We left with this, we left this conference and had, 89 countries that were grouped together that signed the treaty and 55 countries that did not. And the alliances between those countries were kind of odd. And the kinds of issues, when we looked at it, were also, it just didn't really quite make sense to us. We heard a lot of things when we were in Dubai at the Wicket that were really troubling. So, for example, the question of spam in Africa in particular was something that's very important to African policymakers, and yet the Western world largely poo-pooed it and didn't listen to them and said, hey, this is not an issue that you should be worried about, and that heightened the tensions and created a lot more separation between us than it should help. It was also the case with cybersecurity, and there's a few other topics. And so we sort of stepped back and tried to make sense of it. And in an effort to try to explain why we sort of viscerally felt that that certain things were just inappropriate for a treaty, but didn't really know how to explain, we, of course, went to the layered model, which is the engineer's way of looking at the internet. And there's no way to look at the layered model if you're worth your salt without making some modifications and changes to it. And so we took one version of the layered model, the infrastructure layer, the logical layer, and the content layer, and added a new, what we call the social layer at the top that deals with questions of trust and identity, and tried to see what are the institutions, where are what are the policy groups, whether they be NGOs, UN institutions, or other organizations that are addressing these questions. And how do you overlay what those institutions are to the layered model? And we looked at, for example, the ITU, and we were very comfortable with the work that the ITU does in infrastructure. It's had a 150-year history in dealing with infrastructure questions, and it does so very effectively. But we were very frustrated viscerally, and I think this probably makes sense also intellectually, with some of the work that the ITU was doing in the upper layer, in the upper stack, questions of content, questions of social and identity and privacy. These are not in the ITU's sweet spot, and yet they were very much at the forefront of the policy discussions that took place in Dubai. And so when you look at the map of if you assume that this layered model makes any sense, and you kind of try to overlay some of the organizations on top of it, you really see some significant holes. There's quite a lot of good work in the infrastructure layer. I mean, the ITU does fantastic work there. If you go up to the logical layer, there's ICANN and the IETF and a lot of good organizations that are doing multi-stakeholder work. But there's a real gap when it comes to content and when it comes to the social layer, areas of trust and identity. Groups like the UNHR Council and UNESCO are doing some work there, but there's a hole. And so this we found to be very useful, and it's very complementary to this type of an analysis, because this looks at things from our perspective as a way to sort of see where the discussions are taking place and what are the organizations that are doing them. But what we're trying to answer in the work that we did was to ask the question of whether the organizations that are hosting these particular events are the right organizations to be hosting them at all. And we think that there's a lot of opportunity to continue to look at that and to continue to bring up and to essentially stand up new organizations in some of these areas, particularly in the upper stack, because if that doesn't happen, we're going to have organizations that are sort of down in the lower stack, the IETFs, the ICANNs, the ITUs that are very well established in infrastructure, and they're going to be dealing with topics that are in the upper stack, and it's going to feel very awkward. And anyhow, that's the paper that we wrote over the course of the last year, and that's our contribution to the taxonomy. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for these two ideas to come together at some point.
Yes, thanks for that. And I know, for instance, that Google has also been working with the ITU on ITU stats. You haven't mentioned it now, but there's some useful information there, and something also to think about when we think about kind of taking it to the next level, visualizing data and taking it up, and kind of how that could be made more user-friendly. And on that note, that gives me a segue to introduce Pritam. Pritam from the ITU, if you could say maybe a few words about your reflections on the topic.
Thank you, and thank you, Leah and Sam, for inviting me first. I'm Pritam Malur from the ITU. I'm an advisor in the General Secretariat. So I'll quickly touch upon the issue in general. So clearly it's an important effort and it's a very difficult effort and can only be achieved by collaboration. So that's very clear. But there is this engineering side of my brain which is kicking me, telling me to intervene here because I still can't understand the scoping of the problem. So I just quickly typed down a few points. So obviously the first thing you need to talk about is what are the topics you're looking at? And that depends on your definition of what internet governance is. If you take the narrow view, it's of course critical internet resources, and you've heard that debate again and again. If you take the broader view, it's the full spectrum of internet governance as defined by the WSIS text, the WSIS outcome documents, the various action lines. And I keep going back to this Diplo diagram, the railroad diagram that they had. Jovan is here and he can probably show you that if he has it. But it's a beautiful diagram. And critical internet resources is just one small part of it. You have gender, youth, taxation, infrastructure, accessibility for people with disabilities. You have access, which is completely different, security, privacy, many, many issues. So the second question is, how wide are you spreading your net here? What are you focusing on? And whom are you talking to then? So if you're taking the broader definition of internet governance, it's not just a few agencies. I think there are 35 agencies, many UN bodies, all of them, and I'm only talking about my community, the IGO community here, all of them have some work or the other on many, many different categories. For example, we had the WSIS Plus 10 high-level event at ITU this year, co-hosted by, co-organized by ITU, UNESCO, UNCTAD, UNDP, many, many different agencies, UN Women. So many of them were there taking care of their own action lines. That essentially shows that each of them act as a facilitator for many of these topics here. And I just saw this diagram here, this flyer here. I have to go and visit the website. I apologize, I haven't seen the NetGov map yet, but it's on my to-do list first thing tonight. But it has the UN processes on the left, it has the ITU processes on the right, which is very interesting because ITU is the oldest UN agency. We are celebrating our 150th year next year. So to separate these processes is quite interesting. I see CSTD here, which is, CSTD is serviced by UNCTAD, and UNCTAD has many, many other processes, including great indicators that they do. So clearly, this has to be looked into in a lot of depth, and there are regional organizations, of course. In Europe, you have Council of Europe. You have the BRICS banks, which just announced their $100 billion effort, and if you look at the charter that they published, there are at least 6 or 7 points which are on ICTs, primarily focused on ICTs. This shows that they're giving it a lot of importance. You have the Organization of American States, and you have ASEAN, you have many, many different regions. And again, I'm talking only about IGOs. So it's a problem much more complex, much more difficult than just a few organizations here and there. To say it shortly, it is complicated. It's very, very complicated. So again, you need to look at the outcome of this exercise. You'll have mapped it, you will have mapped it well to the best of your abilities, and then it might look like the, I remember in the mid-2000s or probably late 2000s, I saw these diagrams of social networks. Beautiful graphs, absolutely amazing looking on screen, but very difficult to decipher. So you need to figure out what is the use of this. Is it being used to define the mandates of organizations? Is it for information only? So there are many, many issues which need to be sorted out. And of course, ITU is very happy to collaborate on this effort. We contributed to the CSTD effort, and we think it has a lot of potential. So, thanks.
Thanks, Bhutan. You gave me a nice segue into the next speaker as well. Jovan, if you're happy to continue and give us a few words maybe about the Geneva Internet Platform and what the Diplo has been doing in this field.
Thank you, Lea. You may display the PowerPoint to show the diagram that Prita mentioned. Thank you. Pritam. Well, what was said resonate with our experience. We have to be really realistic and humble when it comes to the complexity of task that we are facing. And I'm speaking with about 15 years of experience on classifying internet governance field. We started 15 years ago when we had to deliver the first course on internet governance. We had to map the field, and we created a quite well-known building under construction and different tools for visualization of internet governance. And since then, what we have been doing is basically realizing how complex the exercise is, and Prita mentioned a few examples, not only on the level of gathering information, but also on conceptual, logical level, how to create classification approach. And here I will make one caveat. In 2004, 10 years ago, I delivered a presentation on this issue at the ITU meeting on internet governance. And one of the conveyors of the meeting, I call it taxonomy of internet governance. He came to me and said, well, Jovan, it's misnomer. And I was, it sounds nice, taxonomy. And then I went at that time to some encyclopedia, not Wikipedia, and realized that taxonomy has very specific meaning, and it applies to biology. And it means, among other things, quite hierarchical way of classifying things. Therefore, after that comment, I've been very careful in I dropped using taxonomy, and I'm using more classification. But this just one point for terminological precision that we should use. Now, what I can share from this 15 years of experience, well, we had more or less 2,000 students who attended the course. There are few reflections. One is to combine three possible methodologies. One is, let's say, academic, conceptual, that we have been doing within different initiatives. We sit together, few of us, and we say, okay, what are the issues? Let us put them together. We created this 5 baskets approach in 1999 when we started the first course. That was the type of exercise. You sit and say, okay, here are different issues. This is the first approach. It's valid. It's in a way top-down or deductive approach. The second approach, which I have found extremely valuable, is based on the reflections from the people who read this text. I'm referring to our internet governance book and our courses. Students attend the course and say, well, it doesn't make sense. Does really cybersecurity fit here in this basket? Therefore, when you have 1,000 students reflecting on the text, that's really the most valuable feedback. This is the second feedback that we have been using to fine-tune our classification from 1999. The third one is the latest, is data mining that we have started using 3 years ago with basically transcripts of internet governance. Therefore, what we are trying is to see how this classification with 5 baskets are infrastructure, legal, economic, socio-cultural, and development basket. How do they fit with the rhetorics of the many people in the room? People who are, we are blessed with these great transcripts. How does it fit? Does it fit reality, what we designed in 1999? And this is another extremely valuable resource. For example, proximity of the words. We now realize that 5 basket approach, which is simple and manageable, cannot sustain the latest development. We have to extend it. This is the news I have to reveal, with 2 more baskets. One is cybersecurity, and the other is human rights. Therefore, it will be 7 baskets building, which we'll have to design. Therefore, this is the sort of tripartite process, harnessing expertise of many people coming from different policy sectors, doing automatic data mining, and doing some sort of academic exercise of mapping the field. Now, in this exercise, what we noticed, and it's very important for the future work, is that every issue has at least 5, if not more, policy perspectives. Here is an example of copyright issue. It has to be updated. We did even quantification. One has to be careful with quantifications, but we divided different aspects of the copyright and assigned them to different baskets. This is extremely important because issues are not they do not belong only to one classification group. And in that exercise, what was then done, it's a bit complicated, but it should be in a way Rubik cube with what the line, what are the issues and topics, where are they discussed, and who are the actors. And the intersection, if you can visualize the Rubik cube, famous Rubik cube, you have a how. How are they addressed? Are they discussed? Are they analyzed? Are there decisions on these issues? Therefore, that's dynamic is the key. And this is the dynamics when you get complexity of the whole internet governance field, when you start moving and trying to solve. Now, we always say that you, unlike the real Rubik cube, you shouldn't solve it because that would be probably difficult and not very good for internet governance. But we shouldn't stop trying to solve it, to make some sort of less cognitive noise. And that's one point. Here is, for example, what we are planning to focus in 2015 on interplay between cybersecurity, human rights, and innovative, friendly business regulation through our activities. The Hague conference, what I have heard, will have also similar approach. Therefore, multidisciplinary approach, interplay between cybersecurity, human rights, and other fields. This is a challenge that we all of us are facing with different professional cultures, with relatively algorithm-driven approach in IT culture. And I have professional background both in IT and diplomacy and international law, and sometimes quite a complex line between A and B and diplomacy. Here is the visualization of our observatory, what is going to do basically to help the user at the bottom of the screen to make sense of this. What are the issues? Who are the players? How is it performed? Where is it performed? Documents, media, and other exercises. And we have been working very hard at the Geneva Internet Platform of launching soon this process. Data mining system is ready. You can hear the analysis of the language of IGF every next morning. We are publishing it. Yesterday we published analysis of open speeches, where we noticed that there was high level of optimism and relatively low level of realism in the speeches that were delivered. That this is the map of the issues covered in internet governance based on this classification methodology in Geneva. We calculated that it's approximately 52% of internet governance issues which are covered by processes centered in Geneva, by international organizations in Geneva. Well, one visualization, well, you can find close to 500 visualization where we've been trying to reduce this complexity into understandable way for diplomats and other involved in these processes. And what really matters, we do a lot of data mining, we do a lot of exact system, but what it really matters is the context. Context is the king, context is the content. And sometimes we underestimate the relevance of the policy, context, discussion, cultural when we address internet governance issues. In brief, congratulations for this initiative. We can contribute with this 15 years of experience with a quite considerable level of data. Today we will discuss 6th edition of Internet Governance book, which is based on this methodology. You're welcome to join us at 5:30 and the launch of the Turkish version of the Internet Governance book as well. We have to use the automation methods, data mining and other tools, but be always aware of the relevance of the context and that policy cannot be quantified. The policy is much more than the quantification. That's, well, I would say more or less more from my side. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jovan. And I'd like to give the word now to Markus Kummer from the Internet Society, perhaps to share their experiences and efforts in this field.
Thank you. Yes, it's an interesting discussion, and I think one thing that is clear, this is a complex issue. I have not seen this approach first, but mapping internet governance is what has been distributed. It looks very interesting, and it's in a way sort of easy to follow at this event-driven, and we all go to events. The Internet Society has taken, for years you may have seen it, I think I should have worked with the organizers beforehand to show the chart, but it doesn't really matter. We have tried to visualize the internet ecosystem, but again, it looks in the end very complex. We just call it a spider chart, but it's also one possible approach, but again, it doesn't make it simpler. We have divided it into the pie into 6 pieces. 3 on the left are more the technical pieces, and the 3 on the right are more the societal pieces. So there is a part of the pie that is naming and addressing. That involves obviously organizations such as ICANN, the RIRs, IANA, the GTLDs, and the CCs. Then another piece of the pie is open standards development. That is W3C, IETF, and IAB, and so on. And then we have shared global services and operation. That includes the root service, the network operators, the internet exchange points, the GTLDs, and the CCs. And then the more social parts of the pie, there we have one piece is the users, and this, I think, is maybe the most important part of the pie. That includes individuals, but also businesses, governments, organizations, service operators. So we are all internet users. Then there's a piece of the pie that is devoted to education and capacity building. There again, we have governments, but we also have organizations such as NGOs like the Internet Society. And the last piece is local, national, regional, or global policy development. And there again, the governments, regional IGOs, global IGOs, but also non-governmental organizations. This is a complex pie, but it corresponds to a complex architecture. The internet has evolved as a distributed technology, and its governance is equally distributed. And it's understandable that governments, especially developing countries, and we touched on that in an earlier workshop on capacity building, they find it difficult to find their way around, and hence their call for attempts to guide them, to make life simpler for them. And like Patrick, we were surprised at Wicked in Dubai in 2012 that spam all of a sudden emerged into an apparently big problem. We had also thought spam had disappeared from the landscape. In the IGF context, we looked at it fairly, was high up on the agenda at the very first meeting in Athens. There we had the OECD explained their spam toolkit, we had the London initiative, and in a way it was explained how one can deal with spam, and from then on there was no particular interest to deal with it in the IGF context, but we had obviously collectively overlooked that many developing countries found it was a problem. So as Internet Society, we also thought then, okay, we have to do something, and we devoted some time in developing workshops on spam, and now there is also a best practice forum on spam precisely to show there are solutions around. And that led us to think that there is maybe a need to explain better how the internet works, and that we have actually a collaborative stewardship framework in place, which is maybe not well understood and which needs better explaining. We published a paper that is posted on the Internet Society website, but it was the beginning of a process that has not yet been concluded, and the original working title had been also taxonomy, but like Diplo, we moved away from that term and we moved to collective stewardship framework. But we essentially take as our starting point of view, there are no real gaps. There is always something there, but this something may not be well known or not be sufficiently known, or may not do the job sufficiently well. But there is on virtually any aspect, but I remain to be corrected, but there's always some group, some small organization doing some work again, back to spam, there are an awful lot of organizations actually dealing with it, but they're not known to a broad and wide public. So there is much merit in this mapping exercise, in this collective effort to make it clearer of where to go and who does what, and then also maybe to enhance visibility of some of these organizations, and maybe also upgrade their work and help strengthening them. I think I'll end with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus. I think what's interesting about what you mentioned about spam is, 'cause looking at this issue, there seems to be kind of two ways that people go about it. One, we want to give a broad overview of everything that's happening, and see how different things interact. And there are more issue-driven demands to see how policies on a specific issue are developing and how to engage on a specific policy. And I think there's value in both. It seems that users and activists that I work with respond much better to the issue-based approach. So it's like the hook to get them involved and to see where things are happening. It's almost that issues are more natural to kind of way of engaging with processes and different actors. Maybe interesting to notice on this point is that I've been looking at how this similar let's say, movement has happened within the climate change sector. And what's happened there is that they started off by saying, let's build this one-stop shop for all climate change policies and to map everything and put it in one place. And it turned out that it just wasn't specific enough for users to get buy-in and to get their interest. And where they are now, and this is a field that's been that's existed and where this has been happening for the last 10 years. So they already went through a process of trying and testing, and I don't think we're there yet. And I think this is a beginning, where we can see how this can evolve and how we can do better. But what's happened in the climate change field is that they ended up saying that actually it makes more sense to have this issue-based approach and have people that are experts looking at different issues that are relevant for their specific type of work. So I know there are a couple of other people here who are working on similar initiatives, and I'd like to kind of invite them to talk. Maybe Bogdan, would you be happy to say a few words and introduce yourself and say what you are doing? Thank you.
Sure. My name is Bogdan Manolea. I'm the Executive Director of the Association for Technology and Internet, shortly APTI, in Romania, Bucharest. And I thought it could be interesting to tell you about a project that we are involved in. The project is called Mapping. You can find the project, it's a EU-funded project by the European Commission. You can find it at mappingtheinternet.eu. However, the purpose is not actually to map the whole internet, although that would be a very interesting idea. But mapping is an acronym. It stands for Managing Alternatives for Privacy, Property, and Internet Governance. This is a project led by the university in Groningen, Netherlands, and there are 16 members, most of them universities, a few NGOs and businesses, and also Diplo is one of the other members of the project. Now, one specific part of the project that you might be interested in is what we called in the project a policy observatory, which is a policy watch that needs to deal with 3 topics that are that are essential to our project. That is privacy, copyright, and internet governance. And when we are talking about internet governance, is of course internet governance in a narrow sense, because otherwise it would have been impossible for us to cover all the everything that is happening at the worldwide level. So. The mapping project started in March this year. We started the work on the policy observatory so the actual work started like 2 months ago. The objectives of the observatory are first to offer a synthetic overview of the policy matters, so we're only focusing on policies, and we're mainly focusing on the countries that are where we have partners in the mapping project, which are like 12 or 13. So the objective of the observatory is one, to offer this synthetic overview, and the second one, to present updated monthly comparison tables on key issues related to policies. But we're aiming to do that in an open way. So in order to allow the free reuse of the information that we have produced, if anyone has another idea how to reuse the data or to do data mining exercises, as our colleagues from Diplo already shown an interest, they would be able to do that. Yeah, so this would be in brief. But if you have any questions, I'm ready to answer.
One interesting thing that we haven't kind of discussed at all is how these different projects are being funded, because some of these are one-off projects, that happen and that's it. Others are well-funded and are likely to go on for years. I think it's important that if you have those smaller projects, to not lose them in the sea of all these initiatives. It would be good to have some way of using experiences that they've had in others. Ben Wagner, would you be happy to continue if I could tempt you?
Sure. So my name is Ben Wagner, and once upon a time I ran something called the Internet Policy Observatory at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm now in Berlin and running a separate project, but just a few brief observations on the project itself and also the context in which some of these discussions are happening. So I think it's very hard to disassociate the topics that are being discussed here from the actual politics of them. So the suggestion, for example, that any changes in the IGF's agenda over the past 10 years could have somehow contributed to the Wicket not wanting to discuss spam, I think is slightly unlikely. Another topic would have been found that was used as equally. There's a political agenda behind all of this. And so I think it's important when we're considering the mapping of different contexts, and what we're essentially doing here is sort of a mapping of the mapping, so a meta mapping, is to consider what's being mapped and also why are these things relevant to either the communities or a broader public, who is involved in them and who is not involved in them, and what power structures and dynamics are perpetuated as a result of that. Because it's an extraordinarily one-sided debate when you simply look at things and judge them as either objectively there or not there without trying to work out what the politics are behind it. A simple relevancy criteria there, so there's some fantastic, nice, funky graphics that we've already seen from Joanna and others. A simple test for that would be to look at newspaper articles in large newspapers covering these topics as a main criteria for relevance. If you can't find a newspaper article about the CSTD working group, and I will challenge you to find one in a large newspaper like the New York Times, then it might be that nobody cares. And that might be also not necessarily a bad thing. So trying to understand why these groups are relevant and not is the one component. The other component is representation, which tells you a lot about the power structures. So there was a meeting this morning of the Hague Conference for Cyberspace where they were trying to explain why they were desperate to organize a conference on cyberspace. And as part of that meeting, they specifically had criticism from people from Access who were suggesting that there was very bad civil society representation at the last conference. Now they indicated, of course, that they would try and remedy that, and it would be better at the next Hague conference in cyberspace as part of the London cyber process. But there it would be interesting again to see, so what is actually in a purely quantitative sense the representation? IGFs tend to have been not particularly awful at that simply because anybody who wants to attend an IGF is basically able to do so. So that's a helpful way of garnering some kind of representation. But again, that's representation with people who have the funding to come here. So there's always a sort of a large layer of power-related issues, and I would encourage a closer look at that in the mapping process, and also a more open discussion about where the funding for these mapping projects comes from, what structures and requirements were made for the mapping projects beforehand, and what expectations came out of them. Because in a lot of cases, when I look at the half a dozen policy observatories. I see different policy agendas behind them that are pushing certain things to become more relevant and others to become less relevant. And there are reasons for that. Some people have a more critical agenda, some people have a less critical agenda, and that shows. So when certain groups are now closer to the World Economic Forum and others are close to the IGF and others are close to the third, they all map in certain ways and those maps produce certain results. So you can't see this space is not as depoliticized as the last hour of this conversation may have suggested. There's far more, and I think that needs to be discussed and discussed openly, otherwise we'll just be talking around shadows.
You haven't really told us about the observatory, just about the project that you were running.
So I was hoping that by telling you all of those things, I could already mention a lot about the observatory. But to be more specific about it, it was attempting to, on the one hand, support research around the world, specifically in Global South countries that was looking at relevant issues. But we were looking both at internet governance and internet foreign policy issues. I can't speak for the project now because I'm not part of it, but in the way that I understood the project, it was an interesting and useful way of essentially reconceiving what could be considered internet governance and what could be considered sort of foreign policies of the internet, bringing in communities that otherwise weren't part of those conversations and trying to push them to engage with debates that otherwise they might really not care about that much. And that, of course, requires both resources, so part of that was funded, and that wasn't always the easiest negotiation, but it's an important one. And the other side of that is to make sure that when you're bringing people into debates and engaging them, that you also take their position seriously. It's very easy in all of these debates to tell people, this is the law of the internet, this is how it works, now please listen and accept our judgments of how wondrous the networks work and how brilliant they will be for your economy. This is not typically the position that local stakeholders and communities have of these sorts of networks, as a result of which it's not always helpful even to link them up and to engage with them, simply because that engagement itself brings with it a whole baggage of ideas, agendas, suggestions, problems, difficulties. And a lot of the project, at least as I tried to understand it, is to listen and to understand not just what the issues are that are popping up every day, but also what the understanding of communities around the world is of the internet and the stuff that they care about. And that's why I'll be spending the next 2 days at the Internet Ungovernance Forum rather than the Internet Governance Forum, simply because it seems far more relevant from my perspective to local concerns of local people who are actually doing important things in Turkey. And so that to get that to happen is a challenge in the context of a lot of the IGF issues. If you want to know more about this wondrous forum, there's a stand outside, and you can go to, I think it's iuf.alternativbilisim.org. Or just put Internet Ungovernance Forum into your search engine of choice and hope that it's not filtered out by the powers that be.
Thank you, Ben, for that useful contribution. I saw a hand raised there, so please.
Yeah, my name is Jens Best from Wikimedia Germany. I'm a board member there, but I'm also going to speak as a European internet activist on some of the issues you mentioned. I like the way that several ideas popping up about the technical or the practical approach to map the things. But then again, I want to add something what Ben said, that if you want to base the whole thing on issue-based questions, if you want to share the work, and if you have power questions coming up by introducing the infrastructure of the idea we're discussing today here, I think the most important thing is to remember us to also work result orientated, and therefore I really would like to. I would like to see this database or even a wiki run by maybe a body like the United Nations. I'm just imagining the United Nations of the 21st century using wiki and making unconference also to because let's be honest, the multi-stakeholder approach we share here, because we come from the internet, is one way to do it. How NGOs are integrated in United Nations work, Or let's give me a European example. On the European level, Wikimedia Germany started a free knowledge advocacy group, which is now going to be shared by other Wikimedia chapters, European chapters. Then also we have 34 organizations, civil rights organizations, on EDRI, the European Digital Rights Initiative. But then again, the money. And there's another organization which has a lot of money, and it's called, it has was sagt man, die Eier? It has the, yeah, the balls, it has the balls to call itself European Internet Foundation, and it's there since 2000, and it's an intergroup. An intergroup on the European Parliament means there's an official and an unofficial way to do it. This is it's a group for parliamentarians on the European level, for the European Parliament, and also for civil society and for business. These intergroups don't speak for the European Union or the European Parliament, but they're very closely connected. The official one is paid by the European Parliament, the unofficials are paid by the companies paying that. And there's one since 2000 which has the balls to call itself European Internet Foundation, which is basically all internet companies or related companies, businesses, who wants to lobby in Brussels. And you can see that the multi-stakeholder approach in Brussels is divided by very poor but very passionate European digital rights initiatives with 34 European initiatives, and on the other hand, the internet companies. So the reality, the global reality of multi-stakeholder reality, if we leave this conference, is slightly different, and I think we have to accept that because result-orientated means that we want to see results not only on the infrastructure level, which is the technical backbone. You know, that's what we as an organization and the Internet Society, for example, are controlling. But all the other aspects, and the colleague just mentioned, legal line, economic line, development line, socio-cultural line, and also the human rights line. These are questions going far beyond nerdistan. Yeah, this is not a nerd talk anymore. This is a talk where essential human being aspects of life and culture are touched. And therefore we need to open up, and therefore I hope that this idea of mapping and framing gives us the idea of a database or a wiki or something where we can work together, but on a shared idea. Meaning, for example, I'm pretty keen on making this time in Brussels an intergroup, and have a lot of parliamentarians supporting it already, that we get an intergroup on the European Parliament, which is not sponsored by any company, but is an official one, and where civil society, interested companies, and parliamentarians on the European level can talk about sociocultural and development aspects, and also the human right aspect. Because I want to finish with one example, which is a crack also in this assembly here in Istanbul. Net neutrality versus zero rating. As a little example, but an important example, because it shows that our unity we have as the people coming from the internet is breaking up. Because on the one hand, zero rating is a business decision, and on the other hand, net neutrality is a principle we held high. So this is one example where we need to find the human rights level to know what we agree on a global scale, and where are our cultural differences.
Yeah, so part of what Samantha and I were talking about, where we could put together like a mailing list or something where we can exchange information further for those who are interested to kind of keep working on this and exchanging information. Perhaps interesting to note that last year there was a similar initiative to pool different existing initiatives within cybersecurity. And they already went through this process, so it would be interesting to look at how they did that. And yeah, thanks. I would like to thank everyone for participating in this workshop. We're at the end of our session. I don't know if there are any other remarks. Speak now or hold your peace forever. All right. Well, thank you very much once again. I hope to see you around later today.